human beings are amazing. They can kind of do anything, truly. Yeah, some people are more talented than others, whatever. But frankly, if you get kind of addicted to putting yourself out of that comfort zone, it's amazing what you can accomplish. I love looking for hard shit to do.
Right.
And frankly, that's kind of what drives me. And I think that's really what I want to push my kids and anybody else to kind of get out of that comfort zone.
That's a rough start. It's a early morning. We got lots of shit happening during the day, and we're headed over to Idaho this afternoon. So it's a 7 a.m. in the morning podcast. I wasn't sure if we'd be doing this over coffee or whiskey, but we might have to do another one down the road over whiskey.
Yeah, get a little Kahlua in that coffee, and it might sport things up a little bit.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, you're actually our director of operations. Andrew pretty much handles everything that happens downstairs, which downstairs means our production floor, managing all our people down there. When did you start? August of last year?
Yep. Well, I went to TAC at the end of July. I wasn't officially on the team yet, just kind of getting a feel for everything.
That's right. So
next week I jumped
been
on.
a little over a year, been on board here, and it's been awesome. But before we kind of get into that, I thought we'd step back because, like, a lot of things we've actually been waiting to talk about stuff until we do it on the podcast, because I haven't actually asked you a lot about, like, growing up or whatever, just because I knew we would eventually do this. I've been saving this podcast for when I couldn't find a cooler person to interview.
Yeah, I'd like to represent the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, well, you're definitely one of the best at the bottom of the barrel. No, we've had cool people coming through, and it's been we've been busy on the road and stuff, and so it's a good time to jump on and do it.
We're busy here, so. Yeah.
So you grew up in Montana, right?
Yep.
Born and raised?
Mm-hmm. Yep, so I was born and raised in Billings, Montana. I'm actually a fifth-generation Montanan all the way through my mom's side, so we've been in and out of Montana on both my mom and dad's side, for over 100 years. So, yeah, I was born here and born in Billings, the sprawling mecca that it is, really green and beautiful. I hope everybody looks to that side of the state if they're going to come.
Yeah, that's definitely the prettiest side.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the area that's growing the most. That's where everyone from California wants to live, is out around Billings.
Yep.
Roundup, Miles City,
Lewistown.
Yeah, Ekalaka.
Yeah, it's funny. We've got family actually that farm and ranch out of Forsyth and Sidney, Montana, and Fairview, and we actually have some ground on the North Dakota Montana border. So
we like to say that's where you can watch your dog run away for a week.
Yeah.
I should probably go get him. He's been running for 4 days.
Yeah.
But, what did your family do over there?
So my mom, she was in banking. And my dad had just kind of left a career in athletics. And then, honestly, my childhood was actually kind of crazy. Really, even stepping back, when I was born, my mom had cancer.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, while I was born. So immediately, they took her in the OR after they pulled me out of there. And, so we were separated immediately. And she went through several surgeries. I stayed at the hospital, and my grandma kind of took care of me. And then...
What kind of cancer?
Cervical cancer.
Wow. So they found it during
the pregnancy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she then, she had to stay there, and then she went through radiation. And so those first couple months of my life, was pretty hard on her. And my dad wasn't around a bunch. Mm-hmm. And so it just kind of made for
was he still an athlete
start.
At that point?
No.
Oh.
It was still kind of a tough start there. So, and then honestly, it was pretty much that way for most of my childhood. So he, my dad, like I said, he was an athlete. He did play in the NFL. He's obviously was from Billings as well. He was, went to Billings Senior High. It's where I went. It's where my grandma went. Mm-hmm. Much of my family. So that was kind of cool to go to the same school as them.
What did he play, and who did he play for?
He was in the NFL, so he played football. Obviously, he played for a little bit for the Broncos, but was for the LA Rams back when they were in California the first time.
I guess I was wondering what position.
Oh, defensive end.
Oh, yeah. He must have been a big guy.
Yeah, he was pretty big. But back then, it wasn't quite the same as it is now either.
Right.
So, they didn't make the kind of money they make now either, right? So, he had all sorts of things going on at the same time.
Right.
And his career is pretty short. He was injured, and and then went off to do other things. But it was kind of funny. He about the time I was 2, he was gone. So he had left my mom and kind of went off. And so it was just her and I. And it was like that all the way until I was 7.
Do you have siblings?
I have a half brother and a half sister. So my half sister was born 7 years before me, from my dad, and then my half brother was born 7 years after me. So if anything, he's pretty consistent.
Yeah. No shit. So you said you guys were kind of alone until what age?
Until I was 7.
7.
So we moved around a bunch. Like I said, my mom was a bank teller, and she'd been in banking all the way up until she retired. So, but we moved, from Billings to Havre to Great Falls, spent some time there, and then we ended up moving back to Billings. But it was just her and I, and we had no money, so we were living in people's basements. We had, really small apartments. My mom used to make liver and onions and call it steak.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how we started, but it made us really close. And I just can't say enough great things about my mom and what she really did. She worked real hard, and basically, from the moment she got up, she'd have to work hard for getting me into daycares and having people watch me and all that kind of stuff, because she'd get there early and get home late. So
right. So was 7 about the time she met somebody, or stepdad came in?
Yep. So she'd actually been married again in between that time, but that didn't work out very well. But then she met my stepdad now, who, that was kind of a game changer for us. We did have a tough time up until then, but after that, I was really lucky. I got a pretty normal childhood after that. He was a hardworking guy. That he ran the water department outside of Billings in a small little annex called Lockwood.
Okay.
And he had run that for ever, and just a hardworking blue collar dude. He also went to Billings Senior. He'd been in the Montana area, or he'd been in the Billings area for a long time. Took me hunting, fishing, did all the things that a dad does.
Did you embrace him pretty quickly, or?
Yeah. I was definitely looking for somebody like that. A kid knows when they need it,
right?
And that was definitely it.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. I have a lot of respect for someone who steps into a situation like that. A guy who comes in and, the step parent thing is not easy. Jess is a step parent. Being a step parent isn't super easy, but did he have other kids before he met you guys?
Yeah, he had a daughter as well.
That was the one that was 7 years older.
Nope, so I ended up with a stepsister after that.
Okay.
And she had lived in the Salt Lake, Utah area, where her mom had her and all of that, and then she'd kind of stayed there with grandparents.
So he really didn't have kids either. He probably enjoyed having somebody to take and do things with.
Yeah. Imagine. Man, we hit the lottery with him though. Yeah. Really great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. What
did you do in high school? What sports did you play? And
so I kind of followed the whole athlete thing like most of us do, I think. So even as a young kid, I did all the Y sports. Basketball, soccer, anything that I could. My mom was great about that. She honestly just kept me busy too, because she had to work so hard. So I did that, played Little League baseball. And then by the time I got to high school, I'd kind of narrowed it down and knew like I was going to play football and wrestle. And mostly football. And I started, when I was like 11 or 12 with little guy football, and just played it all the way up until graduated high school. So yeah. And Billings Senior played, at the time, that was when we made a run for the state championship back in 2003, 2004, whatever it was. And we ran a 5-wide no-huddle offense from the shotgun. So we played really complex, fast football for Montana high school football. So I went from playing linebacker to playing center.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But I was like 220, and for a high schooler, that's decent size. Yeah. And I still looked 6'1". So, but we were pulling centers, we were pulling guards. Like I said, we were out of the shotgun. So I set a record at Billings for 1,000 snaps straight without ever having a fumble or anything like that. So shout out to all the quarterbacks that kept that record alive.
You've had more men touch your ass than most guys.
Yeah. That doesn't even count my Army career.
It so much.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Real comfortable.
So and no wonder you went in the Army.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell up and coming quarterbacks, just get in there. Don't worry, I'm used to it. And
Yeah. Yeah. So, were you a pretty good kid in high school? Were you a troublemaker?
yeah, so well,
Did you get in a little bit of trouble?
no, I wouldn't want to do that to my mom and dad. That was kind of one of those, I just knew how hard that they had to work.
Yeah.
So the last thing I was going to do was put them in a position where, like, I did all the dumb little stuff that most of us do. But I wasn't a big, like, drinker or doing any of that kind of stuff in high school. I stayed pretty straight with that. I really had, when I was a little younger, I wanted to back up a little bit. My mom was an Air Force brat and Marine Corps brat. So we had that side of my family was, really patriotic and had a history of service. And so I'd got it in my head that I wanted to, like every kid, I want to be an astronaut or something crazy like that. And so I just kind of had a calling for that. So when I was 12 or 13, I joined what's called Civil Air Patrol. It's basically like an Air Force auxiliary, but similar to the Boy Scouts, just with like aerospace education, search and rescue, and all sorts of stuff like that. It's a really good program. I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah.
It kind of teaches you all the discipline stuff. You learn how to do all the drill and ceremony you do in the military and all that. But it's a feeder program really into the Air Force Academy as well. About 10% of the Air Force Academy kids end up coming from that. So I knew that I had that goal, and I'm kind of a long-term thinker. And I really wanted to get into the Air Force Academy and go and do all that. But as I kind of got into high school and, got distracted with everything else, I wasn't a great student. And it was mostly because I was just really bored.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I was not smart or anything like that. It was just, school wasn't the kind of thing that was really, floating my boat.
I think that's the typical story for boys. That's the way it was for me. I mean, I had my mind on 100 other goals and ideas and things I wanted to do, but definitely applying myself in school wasn't top of the list.
No. So like I was more interested in, so I started playing music and stuff like that when I was a little bit younger. I actually started playing guitar when I was 8. So I've been playing for like 30 some years.
Were you in the pep band then too, or?
I was in all of the kinds of bands. So I was in jazz band playing guitar. I was in our Philharmonic. I was in our chamber orchestras. I was in our bands, our chamber bands, playing different instruments. So I'd played, stand-up bass in all of those orchestral ones, or classical guitar or anything like that. So yeah, I was really musically inclined. And that was something that was kind of just a side passion of mine. But when you come into high school, little side passions start becoming a lot bigger deals to you, and start playing in bands and getting distracted by that kind of stuff. So
did you play in any like bars or anything? Did you play with like a
So my parents were really really good about supporting me. So they took me to all my guitar lessons. Like I said, I started when I was 8. So my mom forced me, and I thank her now, but she forced me to practice for 30 minutes every day. So she'd pull out one of those little white kitchen timers and crank it to 30 minutes. And at the time I was pissed. I was like, I don't want to be doing this. And just the sound of a kitchen timer, it was like Pavlov's dog, just constantly, every time I hear that, I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah.
But thank God she did that, because, I really got to level up pretty quickly doing that. So then, there was like open jam sessions and stuff at bars, and I'm like 13 or 14. And my parents were nice enough to like, let me go to those things. So I'd sit with a bunch of old timers playing blues, just learning how to ad lib, learning how to riff.
Yeah.
And that was a really valuable experience. Then I'd jump in and played with some other bands. A lot of it, for a little while, I played in a band in Billings with 2 other adults. And that was where I got tons of experience, because we'd play at bars and do all that stuff. In Montana, they don't really make a big deal about kids being in bars as long as you're not drinking.
Yeah.
And in fact, you can work at 16 in a bar as long as you're not drinking. So you can bar back, or 18 or whatever it is. But anyway, so yeah, I did a lot of that. So that was a really good experience. But that was also one of the reasons why I probably wasn't the best student in the world either, is I was really focused on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would rather a kid be active and busy after school and into the evening and have goals and things than, I don't know if I say I'd rather, but then you got these kids that are really book smart. They do their thing at school, but then they sit around all afternoon, evening, and do nothing, right? Nope. And that idea of, I think generally busy kids are good kids. You know, now they might not necessarily, their grades might not reflect that, you know, but if you grade a good kid off of their grades, you're going to miss the mark a lot of times. But, you know, it's funny how many C students end up running companies down the road.
Yeah.
You know,
if they even graduate.
Yeah. So, what with the band stuff, it's interesting that you say that about your mom kind of forcing you to practice. 'Cause my kids and I just this weekend were talking about, you know, there was a time period there where I was kind of forcing my kids to do 4-H. I was like, no, you're going to do this. You're going to get a pig, and you're going to, because I was wanting them to have something they were responsible for outside of just the world revolving around them with sports, right? And there was a time there where we kind of had, you know, a couple years when they were little, but like the kids and I were talking about, they were frankly trying to avoid work. Like, it takes some effort, right? And they didn't see at that point, when you're 9 years old, you're not thinking about your bank account, about college. You know, you're not seeing some of the advantages that come with even just with the lessons you learn and stuff. So it's funny because they were all so excited to go get their steers. In the last few years, it's been that way. Yeah. They've just been excited about their animals. And, you know, Macy, who really didn't want to do 4-H in the beginning, you know, not only did she buy a steer this last weekend, she ended up buying a heifer that she could breed. And, you know, I told them, you know, that's why at times, like, parents have to force kids. This idea that, like, well, they don't want to do it, and I'm going to let them find their way and stuff. It's like, I mean, it's fine. Like, if after a little while, if you just hated guitar after a few years, then, you know, I'm sure your mom wasn't going to make you forever. But it's good to force kids out of their comfort zone and get them used to doing something they don't want to do. There's a lesson just in that. Like, just get it done. You know? So I don't know. I think it's a cool story that she made you do that, and then here it ended up becoming one of your biggest passions, you know?
Yeah, it's really, and it's like you said, it's really great to see too, like, you know, Sadie and Hank being leaders within the 4-H community too. Like, it's phenomenal to just be walking the fairgrounds and see how popular those kids are and how hard they've worked. I mean, I get you know, I'm fortunate enough to watch them, you know, work every single day on that. So it's really, really awesome. I think, with any of it, one of the biggest lessons that does come out of that, and it does kind of play out through the rest of, you know, my career and my life and what I want for any kid, is that when you learn that you can kind of, human beings are amazing. They can kind of do anything, truly. Like, yeah, some people are more talented than others, whatever. But frankly, if you get kind of addicted to putting yourself out of that comfort zone, it's amazing what you can accomplish.
Yeah.
And people just got to break that first seal kind of like, hey, this is going to be really hard. But then when you start getting addicted to that, like, I love looking for hard shit to do. Right. And frankly, that's kind of what drives me. And I think that's really what I want to push my kids and anybody else to kind of get out of that comfort zone and do the same thing.
Yeah. And getting a lot of different experiences, even if you never master most of them, just trying stuff for a while and diving into it, because you never know where that one path is going to lead. It might just be a connection to another person that does something else that you think is more interesting. Did you go into the Army right after high school then?
No.
Or did you go to college?
Yeah. I basically, you know, had a pretty good career in terms of high school sports, all-state, all-conference athlete, had some opportunities to go to Carroll and here in Missoula, you know, chance to walk on there and sounded like I had a pretty good shot there. And I was fiercely independent. And so I knew that that's kind of the direction I was going to go, but I wasn't sure. To be completely honest, I was probably a little bit bitter about the childhood I had without, you know, I was really lucky to have a dad, my real dad, my biological dad, you know, having such success in athletics, but it did make me a little bit bitter, and I didn't want to follow in that footstep. So as soon as I graduated, like within a week or two, I jumped on a road crew for concrete just to like pay my way. Because I took out loans and did all the bullshit. I knew I was going to go to the University of Montana, but I went on a road crew, and so I got a whole nother education before I got to college. So getting on a road crew with a couple guys that were, in their 40s or 50s.
A little rough around the edges.
A little rough. Yeah. So we, immediately left Billings and went straight to Custer, South Dakota, and was mudjacking and underpinning houses that were, falling off level, et cetera. And so started doing that, which is just digging holes, basically, with a shovel or a backhoe or whatever, a bobcat. And I did that. We had nothing else to do but dig holes and then go to the bar. And I'm 18. I have no idea what I'm getting into.
Right.
So learned to play a lot of pool. Learned to kind of talk with a different kind of person. And it was great. It was honestly, it was really great. Now I learned also to have the keys to your motel room with your buddy, because if he's going to snag whatever he can, he's going to try to race you back to the hotel room and lock you out and make you sleep in the S10 pickup that you guys were driving. So that happened to me a bunch. Yeah. Because I wasn't paying attention. And so he'd get, he'd get a couple in and then run away. Yeah. So I slept in the cold a lot during that time. I've never told my parents any of this stuff, so that'll be really fun for them. And then we'd move to then we went to Bozeman and did a job there. And then we'd go down to some place like Lovell in Wyoming, and then all really, really nice places to to do that kind of stuff in. Yeah. But it was great, honestly. And then I got in my truck or my Jeep and drove up here to start school. So yeah, I came here, and it was immediate. It was apparent to me that I wasn't going to play. I wasn't going to do athletics at all. I was just going to jump into school. I wasn't a good enough student, obviously, in high school, that I didn't go to the Air Force Academy or any of that kind of stuff. So I was just going to kind of make my way. But I didn't have a direction. And it was probably the only time in my life that I didn't have a plan, which also was a great lesson learned. You got to have a plan. It's something, at least one step at a time that you're kind of looking for. So I spent that first basically year of college here without any direction. Yeah. I did join the fraternity here, Sigma Nu, and that was actually great because it did give a little bit of structure. Immediately had a bunch of hunting buddies and drinking friends, so that was good too. Especially at that age. But that also, without direction, that's as great as that is. It can also make things worse. So by the time I'd finished my freshman year and was basically, I'd gotten into my sophomore year here, and I'd basically had a really great time, wasn't doing great in school, and had no direction, and was ready to kind of I just didn't know what to do. So honestly, one night I'd gotten myself good and tuned up, and about 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up and my dead grandpa was sitting there on the couch with me. I know. Oh, really? Yeah. And it's one of those, this sounds ridiculous, so we're really going to make your podcast interesting. Yeah. And I looked over at him, and he was just disappointed in me. Yeah. And he'd been in the service too, and basically said, "You need to join the military." No kidding. And then I passed back out. And I woke up the next morning and went to the recruiting station to join the Army.
No shit.
Yeah.
Why the Army?
Just hunting, fishing my whole life. The whole Air Force and all that kind of stuff. That was cool. I wanted to be a pilot. But by that time, all of that stuff had kind of, fizzled out, and I just couldn't get enough about being in the woods, hiking, shooting, everything that we love to do. Yeah. You know what I mean? I was always, kind of naturally inclined as a leader amongst my friends and things like that. So I kind of knew that I wanted to eventually go that route and be a leader of people too. But I wanted to do it in an environment that I had a bunch of experience in. Yeah. Right? Even if it's just hiking up mountains. Yeah. And so I'd done a bunch of that, and it was kind of well, I think that fits me better. So I walked into the recruiting station, and like a good recruiter, I tell him exactly what I want, and he completely steers me in another direction. Yeah, because the Army. because he's got a quota. Yeah, and I didn't do any research. I didn't do any I knew I wanted to be an infantryman and then go into special forces and do all this stuff. I knew that's what I wanted. But I also wanted to finish what I started with college and a bunch of other stuff. That was one lesson, I think that that was great, is I didn't ever quit anything that I'd started, And so I get there and I basically say, he had a cool guy poster of some guys, shooting guns and coming, out of the woods or jumping out of airplanes and stuff. And I was like, I want to do that. And he's like, well, I don't have any slots for that. And I didn't even know who I was talking to. It was an Army Reserve recruiter.
Yeah.
It wasn't a regular Army guy. It wasn't even a National Guard recruiter. It was an Army Reserve recruiter. They don't have combat arms in the Army Reserve. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know any better, but I'm sitting there like, he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, the only stipulation I have is whatever I choose to do, I need to be back in time to to go to my next, the next year of college. So I need to go through basic training and my advanced training in one summer, basically. And he's like, I got you. So he got me a shitty contract for this MOS. It's called 88 November, which is a transportation management coordinator or something. Basically a logistician.
Yeah.
Like planning airlifts and fucking trucks loads and shit like that.
Yeah.
So not glamorous in the least bit.
But I'm sure he made it sound cooler than it was.
Exactly. So, but the bigger deal was, that I could get it all done in the summer and then get back to school. And then it kind of got me onto a track. So like I started planning as soon as I kind of had those initial conversations. I was like, okay, this is not what I want to do, but this is going to get me to where I want to be.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to finish college. So being in a reserve unit or National Guard unit or whatever was going to be part of the plan. The university had an ROTC program, which is a feeder into the officer corps. But I was going to get some time on the enlisted side too, which for me was non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to ever be in a position where I hadn't, waxed a floor or
right.
pulled fire duty or, picked grass out of rocks. As funny as that sounds, it's like it was really important to me.
Yeah.
And so I went to basic training. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, which it's not hard. Like it was, especially for an athlete and a guy from Montana. I had a great time, and everybody, was nervous and scared and stuff. And I loved every single second of it.
Really?
For me, it was exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And so none of it was difficult.
Yeah.
And I kind of kept that mentality in everything I did in the Army, just because I just knew like you're only going to get to do this stuff once. So
right.
It's probably the most present I'd ever been too, where I wasn't thinking ahead. It was just one of those like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, jumped right in and had a great time. And then went to my, did basic training, went to my advanced individual training at, off of Virginia Beach, which is at Fort Eustis, which is now Langley Eustis. Was there for a couple months, and then I turned 21 actually when I was in basic training. So then when I got back, me and my buddies, who also turned 21 at the same time, we had a bunch of friends of mine had all kind of gone off to basic training and then come back to school. Mm-hmm. And so we decided to try to drink every bit of alcohol there was in Missoula from about September to November every day for about 2-3 months straight.
Right.
Meanwhile, I had contracted as an ROTC cadet, and had some obligations and some responsibilities and stuff like that. So that turned into learning a couple hard lessons about, doing PT and, working out in the morning really hungover. And
yeah. You mean a beer diet doesn't lend to PT?
No.
Staying in shape.
But I tried really hard. But that was also one of those like, all right, check that off my list. Mm-hmm. No more benders, no more any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So got it out of my system a little bit. And then I really had to focus because now I was not doing super great in school, but I had an obligation to finish college.
Had you chose a degree at this point?
Yeah. Originally I had a history degree in my freshman year, sophomore year. And then by that time my whole plan had kind of come together and I was like, I'm going to go to Special Forces. And I had traveled a little bit in high school, gone to Italy, and I just absolutely loved to travel, loved language, loved culture, all of that stuff. So I changed my degree to anthropology. So I ended up getting a degree in anthropology, cultural anthropology, and archaeology. So where I studied like,
what's cultural anthropology?
It's study of human culture, right? So and it's what's great about it from a university standpoint is it covers all types of culture. It's not like one you can pick, like, oh, I want to look at, whatever. It really forces you to see cultures that are so far outside of what you're ever used to or what you'd even pick for yourself. So I loved that. Mm-hmm. And then the archaeology side was really about Montana archaeology because the university here has got an excellent program. So I still kept with the whole history of Montana kind of thing, but got to do it for real. Mm-hmm. And that was really great. So going up to Garnet, going around just whatever, all of Montana and Little Bighorn Battlefield, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that was actually, that made school really interesting for me, but it also was part of like the plan, especially like understanding culture. And so, yeah, it refocused. So I started doing really good in school, knowing that I needed to graduate. So then kind of went through the rest of it, and it was time to commission in the Army. So I got
and you were in the reserves this whole time?
The whole time, yeah. So I was, eventually got out as an E5 and then commissioned. So when I commissioned into the infantry because that's what I wanted. And then then my duty station was Italy. So Vicenza, Italy, where the 173rd Airborne was. And that's really, that was all part of like, I literally wrote it all out, what I wanted to do. I traveled to Italy before. I fell in love with it. I wanted to go there. I wanted to be in the infantry. I wanted to be in an airborne unit. I wanted to do all of these little things. And so I had to work really hard to get to those.
So when did you go to like airborne school?
So as soon as I commissioned, here at the university, there's basically 3 or 4 months of time because, a lot of the West Point cadets jump right in. They go to their basic officer leader courses. They go to some of their other training, and then they kind of get into the pipeline at Fort Benning. This is on the infantry side. So I had to wait. So I ended up teaching summer classes here at the university for like military science and leadership. So that was awesome. So I got to polish it a little bit on, speaking in front of people, teaching, that kind of thing. And then I went. So then I go to my basic officer leader course at Fort Benning. Then I go to my infantry qualification course, basically where they teach you all the stuff you need to be an infantryman and all that. And then the way the pipeline works is especially if you're assigned to airborne units or like the 173rd, has kind of an unspoken rule that you need to be Ranger qualified to go there, period. As an officer, and then even as an NCO or senior NCO, which means non-commissioned officer, sergeants, et cetera, all need to be Ranger qualified for the most part too. And it's kind of a feeder program that runs back and forth between Ranger Regiment and conventional Army. So people are jumping in and out of those just at that particular unit. The 82nd has that a little bit, but not as much. So it was kind of, I knew that I had to get through some of those gates. So get through some of that training and then immediately go to an airborne slot. So this is basically a year-long pipeline. And so you go, basic qualification courses and then go to airborne school. And then we had basically the class before us at Ranger School, a bunch of people cheated. They'd basically gotten, and a bunch of guys that know anything about this will remember this too. They basically disqualified an entire class.
Really?
Yeah. And like never to return.
Cheated in how?
So they had a copy, like Google Maps copy or whatever it was at the time. I don't think Google Maps is around, but it was something like that. That had all of the land nav points.
Oh.
And you have to hit these gates, when you're in school, or else you get recycled or you get kicked out. So they had basically had it. A bunch of them smoked right through it, clearly caught cheating, and then lied about it. And so that basically delayed all of us behind them. So we're sitting there like figuring out, like twiddling our thumbs. So what's great is a bunch of the schools are there at Fort Benning, like sniper school or, javelin schools or mortar leader courses, like all of these little things that qualify you to lead different organizations within the military, mechanized leader course and all that kind of stuff. So I ended up having to find stuff to do. So I went to like javelin gunner's course. I went to sniper employment leaders course, which is basically just the academic side of sniper school and qualification side. So like you learn all the academic stuff, you shoot a bunch, but you don't do the stocks, which honestly is the hard part. So I did the easy part. And then I went straight to Ranger school. And I was a summer Ranger, meaning that I think I went in July. Yeah. Started in July in the heat of summer with 110-pound packs, basically, and it's just a party from there.
Yeah.
So
yeah. How did you how did you find that course? I mean, was it excruciatingly difficult?
Again, it was one of those like, yeah, it's hard. Like you have to be in great shape.
Do you ever get up against the point of thinking of quitting?
Never.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything in the military that I ever felt that way, ever. And in combat, anything. I didn't ever feel that way. I guess just because I wanted to be there, and it's what I wanted to do. As soon as I enlisted, I had the biggest weight off of my shoulders.
Really?
It was one of those, like,
Now you had a direction.
now I had, not even that, I just enjoyed life. It was not like, a lot of guys work for their money. I didn't feel that way at all. Like, that was more just like to sustain my life. But I went to work because I enjoyed work. It had nothing to do with making a bunch of money or anything like that, because I was in the military, you're not making a bunch of money.
Yeah. How long is Ranger School?
60 days if you go straight through.
Okay.
And so, but it's 60 days of a suck fest,
Did you get rolled at all on anything? Or
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope, I went straight through. But and it's in 3 phases. There's a Fort Benning phase, which is basically, and the whole point, Ranger School is a giant suck fest, don't get me wrong, but it's really a leadership course. And the reason it is because it pushes everybody. It doesn't matter. I went to school with, Green Berets, with guys from regiment, with guys all over, with Marine Recon, all different walks of life, are allowed to go to that school. And the whole point of it is to push you to your breaking point and then make you lead people while they're at their breaking point.
Right.
So that, and then you're evaluated on it. And that's why that's a valuable school. Get everybody cold or hot or hungry or so tired that they can't move. Have everybody lose 30, 40, 50 pounds sometimes. And then make them go do stuff. That's hard. You know what I mean? Lots of miles of rucking and then getting onto an objective and hitting the objective, et cetera.
So when you were done with Ranger School, that's when you went to Italy then?
Yep.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, right before that, so I joined in 2005, spent a bunch of time. And then, by 2008, I already knew I was going to Italy. I knew I was I knew basically everything.
Well, and real quick, before you get into all that, like now 2005, it's the heat of the Iraq war. Like, how prevalent was it on your mind that you were going to be going to war? What were your thoughts about that conflict? And, at this point, it's pretty obvious we're in it pretty heavy at that,
I was scared I was going to miss it because it was 2005. So Iraq had already been raging for 2 years.
Right.
The war in Afghanistan had been raging for 4 years. And I was thinking they're going to have this thing licked by the time I'm out of this pipeline.
Right.
But I also didn't want to quit what I was doing just because I wanted to have all of these little box checked, right? And then over time, I started to see, like, okay, I'm not going to miss anything. If anything, things are starting to get a little wild. And so so then that just made me focus even more in terms of, like, I knew I had to be great because people were going to actually rely on me, and we needed to get it done.
Right.
It was actually really cool here in the Bitterroot. We have a bunch of former Tier 1 special operators that have all retired or have houses or are visiting or whatever. So we'd get some of these guys from like Delta and stuff that swing in and talk to our classes. So it was awesome for a young guy, knowing that I'm going into, combat field and knowing where I wanted to go, to just ask these guys the hard questions and immediate lessons learned, because these guys were doing rotations all the time. And so they were coming in and out of Afghanistan and Iraq with lessons learned constantly.
Well, that was definitely a time period where, like you say, there was a lot of lessons being learned. Because, pre 9/11, it had been quite a long time since we'd really been in conflict, real conflict. And you hear that a lot. The tactics, the equipment, medical training, like everything came ahead light years in that especially in that first 5 or 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. So we even had a former Delta Sergeant Major, and I've actually reached out to him since and talked to him about this day, but he'd come and talk to us a little bit, and I had remembered asking him, like, hey, if you could tell a young leader, what's the lesson that you want every one of us to know right now? And he had basically talked about an anecdote when they were in Iraq that he had talked to this tank commander, basically had an M1A1 and froze, and like they weren't maneuvering at all. They were taking fire. They weren't maneuvering. Yet he had this big ass tank. So this operator came up to the little phone on the outside of it and said, "Hey man, you got to do X, Y, or Z." And he only used that as an example of, like, keep pressing the objective constantly. And I saw it in combat, like how easy it is as soon as you start taking fire to, circle the wagons and death blossom everything, meaning like just start shooting in every direction and not being decisive. And it was like, had he not anybody could easily have been in that situation, but I think for that's something that just resonated with me to maneuver aggressively, and just continually make decisions.
Right.
And that was all before I'd gone to like Ranger School or anything else. And so like that was really key advice. And, you know, I ended up reaching out and just said like, hey man, that little tiny little nugget that doesn't sound like much, it really doesn't sound like anything.
Yeah.
It had a lot, because it does remind you. He also told me like, hey, if they run away, they're probably Taliban. If they don't and they stay and fight, they're probably Al Qaeda. Like all of that stuff, believe it or not, is absolutely accurate. So like, and I saw it all. And it was really great because it was just cool that he was able to distill that and kind of give those little nuggets out. Sure. And then I thought about that throughout the rest of my time. So anyway, fast forward, I knew I was going to Italy. At the same time, in July 13th of 2008, we had the 173rd in my same battalion, in my same company, had what's called the Battle of Wanat, where we lost 13 service members, and a lot of heroics came out of that, right, as well. But it was also just a really sad thing. But like I actually took it personally, and I wasn't even in the unit yet. I knew that's where I was going. I already had orders, but I had to go through the rest of this pipeline. So that stuck with me, and I was like, and I just really paid attention to it, and that happened in Kunar province, Afghanistan. And so by the time I went through all of my training and got through Ranger School and did all of that stuff, and got to the unit, I was assigned to chosen company, 2nd Battalion, the 503rd with 173rd, and that was the same company, which I didn't know what company I was going to get or anything like that. So I got sent right to the exact same company. And that was 2nd Platoon, and I ended up taking over for 3rd Platoon. And my platoon sergeant, his name's Eric Phillips, he ended up on that previous deployment. So basically what happened was they went on that deployment on OEF 8. And then by the time I got back to the 173rd, we already had orders to go right back there, the exact same places in Kunar for OEF 10. And my platoon sergeant was one of the heroes of that time. He'll hate that I just said that, but he has the Distinguished Service Cross and Silver Star and a bunch of Purple Hearts and all that kind of stuff. Incredible NCO. Now he's just retired actually as a warrant officer with Special Forces. But it was great because I jumped right into a unit that had combat experience for the most part. But every time those rotations happen, like half the unit gets gutted, and you get a bunch of new people. You got a bunch of NCOs that do have experience. Everybody kind of moves around. They go do their different assignments, et cetera. So I got there right towards the end of our train up, and kind of had to prove myself immediately with a bunch of combat proven people.
And this was in Afghanistan?
This was still in Italy right before we deployed to Afghanistan.
Okay.
And so basically we did a couple little train ups, but I didn't know, I hadn't earned any trust with anybody yet at that point, right? But I did have a great NCO who was there kind of teaching, coaching, and mentoring me. And, you know, and that's something that was also invaluable that I hope anybody that wants to be an officer understands, like, listen to those guys. Don't, like, one of the biggest pieces of advice I have is don't ever go into a role, you know, when you're in charge, be in charge, but you've got to trust and listen to the people that have got the experience. And I know you saw the exact same thing as a lineman. That's what saves people's lives, is to trust that stuff and then also be decisive as a leader. Right. You know, communicate twice as much as you think you need to, because that'll make for a better relationship and more effective leadership. So anyway, so we got kind of everybody all ready. And a couple people had just come out of that other deployment. So some people had a chip on their shoulder. Some people were scared because they knew how bad it can get. And then some people were just ready to get after it. So I had a really dynamic group of leaders. Some had never had that kind of combat experience, although they'd been to Iraq, they'd been to other parts of Afghanistan. But Kunar province was a totally different ballgame for a lot of people. And so we deployed by like November, I think, of 2009. We were back in country. And so I was assigned basically an 80-kilometer battle space to control as a 24-year-old or 25-year-old, whatever I was, first lieutenant, with, you know, a platoon of 40 guys to cover that entire battle space. And at the time, our strategy there, one, there was a lot of autonomy and a lot of trust from our senior leaders.
Mm-hmm.
I was so lucky to be part of a group of leaders that were super experienced. Lots of them had come from regiment or had done other really great stuff and really fun different things, and kind of cycled back, especially on the officer side.
Mm-hmm.
Officers don't necessarily stay in some of those other organizations as much. They generally have to rotate.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fortunate enough to have leadership that gave us the autonomy, that also trusted that we had the education of the battle space. We had the right tactics. We had the right mission set.
Mm-hmm.
We understood our missions, and we understood how to implement them with the people that we had. And that trust was invaluable. That's the only way
Mm-hmm.
we were winning there, was basically because it's just such a giant swath of land with a bunch of experienced fighters.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I was given that autonomy and basically left to go figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's try to get as much representation into some of these valleys as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Let's stop whatever insurgency there was. Let's stop the IEDs. So anyway, we just kind of got into all of that stuff. And so by December, it was pretty quiet. We'd kind of done our left seat, right seat, which is just when you rotate with another unit. And then by December, we had control of the battle space. And we had heard on some of the radio chatter that like the bad guys know your patches. They know what's on your uniform. They kind of get the general feel of what's going on there. And so all of them had fought our exact unit not just a year before that. And so like all of that kind of word got out that we were back, which I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing from like a strategic level.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if that was the right call or not. I don't really care. It was just one of those, there definitely was a change and things softened. It was weird. Like the unit before us was, slinging lead and getting into a few, ticks. And then we didn't see a bunch right at first, and then it started. So like by December 27th, I remember we got a call and my first firefight. So we go out to this vehicle patrol base with the Afghan National Army. They just basically had this little tiny outpost that was in between one of our combat outposts and another one. And we'd got a call from them saying like, hey, we need help. We're getting shot up. So we all get in our vehicles and go drive out there and get there, and there's nothing. We're like, all right, guys, what's going on? And then, it's at the mouth of this valley, and we're kind of like, all right, what's really happening here? They're like, well, we just keep getting shot up by this gun. And we're like, what are you talking about? And he couldn't really explain it very well. And we're like, there's nobody here. Like, what is this? And then I heard like a boom, boom, boom. And then I lean over to Phil, my platoon sergeant. I was like, what was that? And he didn't hear anything. And then we hear boom, 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 boom again. And I'm like, I hear it, but it's far away. I'm like, what is this? And then the ground exploded. Like rounds started popping up everywhere and splashing all at our feet. And it was plunging fire from a 12.7 millimeter Dishka, which is basically like a 50 cal.
Yeah.
And they had it up on this ridge line, and they were just dumping rounds on top of us, and it was they weren't good. It wasn't effective fire until it was. And so then we returned fire and kind of lit them up. And I only use this as not to tell a war story, but to use it as an anecdote that I was able to then, call in 175 rockets off of Kiowa. I was able to call 120s from one base, 155s from another base. I was able to fire every weapon system I had without asking any permission. It was just execute.
Yeah.
And it shut it down. We did BDA, battle damage assessment, and then we were done.
Mm-hmm.
And it put a stop to it. And then that was basically that entire first half of that deployment. I was able to basically do anything in the U.S. arsenal within reason to stop, contact.
Right.
And and it was just firefights like that every 3 or 4 days for months and months and months on end. Mm-hmm. But we were making progress. It was really great.
Yeah.
And the team, like our whole team was getting better. Everything was going really great. And then we got an order to leave and go to another battle space.
Did you have any, anybody get injured on that or?
Yeah. Not in that one, but we'd go into valleys, and there were some IED makers in Pakistan. We were on the Paki border. So my battle space was literally part of the Paki border. There's a big mountain ridge line in Kunar that basically the Kunar River splits the province, and then on the east side of it is a giant mountain range that is the Pakistan border.
Mm-hmm.
And so the IED makers were over in the tribal areas in Pakistan. They were just pumping over IEDs, and they'd put them in these. And so especially as we would patrol more aggressively into areas, they were starting to drop IEDs all the time. So or put them in, and so they were like pressure plate, really rudimentary IEDs. But yeah, we got blown up by one. And so one of my guys had just got there. He was a brand new private that had no experience. It was his first patrol. Immediately we get blown up.
Really?
So like breaks his legs, and he was fine. We medevaced him and dealt with the ambush and all that stuff. So we get him back, right? So he recovers. We get him back, and the next patrol we go on, he gets shot. The next patrol.
No shit.
Yeah. So it was.
He's a sponge.
And he was fine. I wouldn't be laughing if he wasn't fine. But
yeah,
every single he was brand new kid. Sweetest kid in the world, literally first combat patrol, boom, next one, boom. Like he just was not the luckiest guy in the world.
No shit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a couple, but I was lucky. None of my guys that were under my command were ever killed.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of guys injured, but shot up or blown up or whatever. And we all got blown up at some point or another.
Where was the next battle space you had to go to then?
So then we were assigned, to Wardak province, which is off of Kabul a little bit. It was pretty kinetic as well. A lot bigger IEDs, a lot more IEDs there. Different type of fighters. So like where I was in Kunar, it was flat out Taliban, some other like low level criminal networks, etc. In this other area was more political, more like warlords or like Haqqani network, some Al Qaeda, some Taliban stuff, but like just complicated. Mm-hmm. And everybody was fighting kind of everybody, including us. Well, everybody's fighting us and each other and whatever.
Yeah. So
we were kind of always in the mix. So we went there, and that's actually where I ran into that other guy you had on here, that with Green Beret Racing. And we basically had that battle space together. So like we would do a lot of stuff with that part of 10th Group and with the Hungarian Special Forces and then so basically I got another battle space that was assigned to me. I got a company of Afghan National Army. At the same time, McChrystal had been ousted, and General Petraeus came in to control Afghanistan, and everything changed after that.
Really?
So the level of engagement didn't change. In fact, it got more complex, but I had no tools to fight with, to basically to stop it. It's like soft hands isn't going to stop anything, you know? So rules of engagement changed dramatically. I had I had my 120s mortars on my outpost, and I didn't even have permission to use them. I'd have to call up to battalion. I'd have to, get permission. Then like it just turned into this ridiculous thing. Yeah. So, even with 60 millimeter mortars, which are tiny little mortars that we can hand carry, if it was on a plate, we had to ask permission to use it. If it was in handheld mode, we didn't. So everything we did was in handheld mode from that point on.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I basically had my hands tied, without it really it just emboldened the enemy, so
yeah,
that made things really complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that had to have been really frustrating, especially with, the guys under your leadership, like looking to you for like, why in the hell aren't we doing this? Or why aren't we doing that? Or, where's our permission to engage?
It's funny you say that. That was the hardest part of that deployment, because I had a lot of really great warfighters with me that had tons of experience, that knew how dangerous things were getting for us. And honestly, when you're that active, for that whole year, people are starting to wear a little thin, and you want to be able to be as aggressive as you possibly can. And it starts to scare people, because then their hands are tied a little bit, and the enemy doesn't get to have that. So yeah, I had to deal with that a lot.
How does it work in the military where, you end up leading those guys, though they have more actual experience in combat.
Trust, I think, and that's earned, really, and it's not earned easily. Got a lot of officers especially make the mistake of coming in there thinking like they're God's gift. Yeah, they went to a couple schools and all that stuff. They don't know anything. And I didn't know anything. Despite having like grown up in the mountains and shooting and doing all that shit, doesn't matter.
Right.
What really matters is taking care of the guys, making the best decisions possible for them and for the mission. So your job really is to distill the overall intent of the mission through the experience that you have in your NCOs. So you have to, and then you have to have enough trust that in enough tactical experience and enough tactical know-how that they trust you, that they trust that that's the right thing to do, that they'll execute it.
How often do you ask those guys like, hey, what do you guys think?
Every time.
How should we approach this?
Every single time.
Yeah.
In the end, I'm the ultimate decision authority, right? But it's also my responsibility to develop them as leaders in other ways too. So, excuse me, giving them parts of the mission planning process is really critical, especially if they're good at something, giving them different roles, having them lead like small patrols, at some point when you own that much battle space and you have to have a presence in it 24 hours a day, but you only have, 3 platoons or 4 platoons, you don't have enough bodies to provide security for your own combat outpost and have 24 hours of operation. And, and then as the leader, you can't be on every patrol. You have to be on the most important patrols, but you still have to have trust in some of your senior NCOs that they can handle some of those things.
Yeah. You got to delegate.
You do. And so like, I felt that was really effective and it kept my portion of the battle space, under control, which was a hard thing to do. But in the end, it's all about trusting those guys.
What was it like being over there, especially probably on your when you first dropped into country and you saw how those people live compared to, let's face it, you lived about as good as you could live, even though you were not a rich person. And quite frankly, even at the point where you were living in basements, you still were better off than, some of the better off people over there. But coming from Montana and living in a beautiful area of the country, going to college in a beautiful mountain town, security, peace, all that, really no one ever thinks really around here about, not being secure, about their safety, frankly, unless they're hiking and they're worried about a bear. What was that like dropping in a country and like seeing how people in the other part of the world live?
One, I was fascinated because I really loved the culture. I know that sounds so tone deaf, but I was just fascinated by it. It also gave me tons of respect for those people in a lot of ways, right? Not for the people that wanted to, hurt or kill any of my guys. But just the fact that, it was so confirming that we are the greatest nation in the world and that we have it so damn good. It also parts of you do some mental gymnastics, especially as you get out. Like a lot of people deploy, go to major forward operating bases, and that's their deployment. They don't really get to see, they get like rocketed or mortar fire or whatever. But then when you're out on a combat outpost that you dug out of the ground in Hescos and rocks and barbed wire, you start to you have to do the mental gymnastics of like, I have zero security other than what I provide. Right. And so you start to devalue yourself and your life a little bit, because there's a certain point where you're like, I've done the very best I can, and it's probably not enough. Because if enough guys get together and they want to kill us, they're probably going to do it. Or we're going to give them hell, but it's probably going to be rough. And that happened. Like I said, that happened at Whatnot, that happened at Ranch House, that happened in a couple other places.
What do you remember as like your scariest op, your worst, like where you were like, this one's not good? Like,
honestly, and guys that have been through it know it too. Like mortar fire that's right on top of you. Slinging bullets is a little bit when you've got cover and you're able to return fire. I didn't feel it that way. Like, it tightens you up a little bit and you're scared. But we also did it a lot. So like the first couple, were scary, but you get kind of used to it in as much as you can. Mortar fire was probably the thing that scared me the most, that when it was effective, when it was all like literally on top of us, because you don't know where it's coming.
Right.
And it's a sound that, unless you've heard it, it's hard to describe, but it's like 10,000 bowls in a china shop shattering, the ground and the earth, and it's got a sound to it. It's terrifying. And so that's one of the things that I didn't like very much was effective mortar fire.
What do you remember as far as thoughts going through your head, if any, or maybe it was right after, of like your first firefight where it's real, like bullets are flying? Because you can do all the training you want. They're not in training. They're still not, there's a relative level of safety there that you're not firing bullets right over your head.
It's a good question. Honestly, the training is everything. I didn't worry about it. Literally didn't worry about it. I trusted, like we returned fire with enough aggression.
Right.
And when rounds are literally bouncing off like walls, and like, I know a buddy of mine who's a really good friend of mine now, who was actually one of my team sergeants. Him and I kind of were in between. We were in a convoy, and we dismounted to go check on one of our vehicles that had blown up from an IED, and we were in the middle of an ambush. And I remember we're both standing there, literally like shooting, into this grove and returning fire, and we have an RPG land like right in front of us, blow up in front of us, and I get down and kind of poke back up and start shooting. Reality is I should be on my fucking radio, but nothing. Like, I had bumped my radio. This happens all the time, and I'm sure people listening to this can relate. But I bumped my radio off channel and basically like was talking to nobody. And so like I'm just returning fire, and my other buddy's literally shooting, and this RPG blows up in front of us, and there's rounds popping everywhere. And finally I had to grab him and just like pull him back down and be like, hey, knucklehead, like, you do got to get into some cover. Like, this fucking fire is effective.
Yeah.
And we just kind of laughed about it. And then, it was just, you just trust in, especially if it's not like really effective fire. Like if they're like slinging rounds all over the place and stuff, okay, cool. But when it's really effective, you stay down and have to figure it out. But
right.
I didn't have that problem.
Yeah.
It didn't scare me like that. I guess because it's like I said with the whole mental gymnastics, and I think maybe this is where some guys end up with a little bit of PTS or anything like that, is at some point at least I did. I can't speak for everybody, but at some point you reserve, and this sounds fucking dramatic, but it's at some point you reserve the fact that you're probably going to get shot or die, or you're okay with it. Not really like, oh, I'm going to get shot, poor me, or whatever. It's more like I'm okay with it. And it's a big hurdle to go over. But once you've gone over it, I don't know if you ever come back from it a little bit, where you stop valuing your life as much, and you kind of, that existential crisis starts to fade, and you just start focusing on being present and making good decisions.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's everybody's experience, but that was mine.
How were you guys received by, obviously, not received well by the people shooting at you, but the general public, the general populace of Afghanistan? Did you have good conversations with some of the locals? How were you treated?
A mixed bag of everything. So like I was in, especially, when we were in Kunar, we were in parts of valleys that they thought we were the Russians still, because they hadn't, like, we were moving into areas that like they had nobody.
Yeah.
Other than fighting camps and like small farming villages. Right. So like I'd like have really curious people that were like, hey, we've never seen you before, to people that absolutely hated us. Right. And a lot of it was probably because of collateral damage, almost exclusively, frankly.
Yeah.
And then we had some people that like, we would probably put a whooping on a group of people that were terrorizing them, and they loved us.
Yeah.
I saw all of it. The kids were amazing. Obviously it now, given where Afghanistan is now, it's really sad, because all those kids, the little girls, all of them were schools that we built. Like there was, and granted, it was maybe culturally deaf, but we did it anyway. And they, for the little bit of time that we were providing that, they had a different life than they're going to have for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. I've said that, with the shit show of the withdraw, from Afghanistan and everything, like as big of a kind of a quote unquote failure that it appears to be right now, like all that time spent, all that human capital, all the dollars spent, everything. You know, a lot of people look at it as just a total loss, right? But, and that's easy to look at it that way because we literally have nothing from it, but some debt and damaged soldiers and families. However, you know, what I've said kind of since that point is like, you cannot measure, and we really won't know the impact for probably 30 years, frankly, of what providing really an entire generation. You know, if you figure that was a 20-year war, so that 20 years for a kid who's, say, maybe 5 to 7 years old when we came in there, or maybe even a little older, 10, 12, 15 years old, that was living a certain way, and then we provided safety and security for the most part for 20 years. So whether a kid was born and was 20 when we left, or was 12, you know, and in their 30s when we left, and they got to experience going to school, going to college, going to work, doing whatever they were doing, and saw some of the good things that we did there. You know, it might take 30 more years for those people who were 50 and 60 and, you know, 40 when we showed up and hated us to die off. But when those people who were in their 20s and their 30s while we were there and provided that, who knows what kind of a coup, what kind of involvement they'll have in their government, and what'll transpire from that, because they're going to spend the next 20 years, frankly, in misery, and famine and everything else. You never know. That country could literally have an enormous turnaround in 20 years from now, and it's from the safety and security that you guys provided 20, 30 years earlier.
Yeah.
You know, but it's immeasurable, and frankly, a lot of us might not even be around to see it. You know, so it'll be interesting to see. Those are really, it's what it is it's the seeds of freedom that were planted, that quite frankly might take a long time to sprout.
Yeah, we can only really hope for that. You know, the cynical side of me is human beings are resilient, but they also will keep their head down and get through tough times. And honestly, that I think you might be right with like the 8 to 12-year-old kids. Any kid before that wouldn't have known it or seen it, and any kid after that is going to be so irreversibly scarred by what happened after our withdrawal in terms of just their reinculturation to Taliban rule, that I don't know if we're going to see that kind of effect.
Right.
Yeah, that might be a cynical view, but I think it's more of a realist
probably
thought. And frankly, I think that's why it's such a fucking bitter pill to swallow. Is, you know, in the end, I think we did good for what we could do at the time and in the moment. And it's one of those, like, in that present time, it was great, at least for that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've always kind of looked at our fighting soldiers as, you know, quite frankly, you're the hammer, and the hammer doesn't really have a choice in who's swinging it. And you know, there were definitely, you know, you guys were definitely good at hitting the nail, but you know, you guys were sent over there and directed and did the job you were asked to do, and believed in the missions and believed in what you were doing. And you know, I always tell guys that, because I never served, but I always tell guys that are struggling with the withdrawal and everything that happened and whatnot, that, you know, they should just be proud of what they did and how they acted in the moment.
Yep.
And it wasn't their job to decide whether or not to go. I could understand having, you know, guilt or remorse if they were the ones that decided to go, or they were the ones that decided how to leave. Yeah. You know, but you know, you're the hammer. Yeah. You know, you hit nails. That's what your job was. You know?
At the time too, I mean, I was as altruistic as I could be. Like, I wanted to be there and I wanted to do the mission set. And, you know, it wasn't that you know, you also want to test your mettle as a man in general. Like, but that was tested in the first firefight and it was over. Like,
Right.
okay, now we've got an entire year of this. It's like, okay, you've figured it out. You've done your own soul searching. But I was very much altruistic in the fact that, like, I wanted to serve and help those people, you know, and I wanted to take care of my guys the best I possibly could.
Right.
And we all had different opinions. And I think that's what made us even more effective as a team was, like, some guys were just like, I want to get home. I want to do this. I want to do that. Or some, you know, we all had different motivations, but in the end, I think that made for better decision-making when it came to getting on the objective, when it came to doing what we had to do.
Yeah.
So I think overall, like, I can sleep at night from that standpoint. Like, I knew that I was doing the right thing in the right moment. And I could give a fuck about the politics.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you had the best of intentions. And
Sure.
and that's how you sleep. And I think most guys that went over there had the absolute best of intentions.
Yeah.
You know. The only way we were going to completely change and turn around that country would be, frankly, to stay for another 50 years. Like, quite literally, you would have to keep your thumb on that place and literally have a couple full generations die out. I mean, and you know, as bad as the withdrawal was and how it went, and you know, with the Marines that were killed, definitely that could have been avoided. The situation that's there now, I don't think, you know, as soon as the last plane left, I don't care if we did it over 5 years or over freaking 5 days, it was going to turn right back into the shit show that it is, no matter what. You know, so you know, the decision really had to be made: withdraw or stay there for generations.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the withdraw decision was necessarily the wrong one. Like,
sure,
we have our own freaking problems at home. And is it really our job, or frankly, is it really even our business to decide how they live and how they govern? You know, I don't personally think so.
Yeah.
You know, now, should we have absolutely kept a base over there or some freaking place to operate from? Like, 100%. Like, I think we invested enough human capital and financial capital to say we're going to go ahead and keep this little piece of dirt for ourselves to work from. The
only naive hope that I have at all of this, and it's not going to be from our current set of politicians, but is that doctrine and lessons do come out of all of these conflicts in the last 20 years that will refine our defense approach to conflicts like this. Like, and that's something that I think the right people need to be in the right places. And like I said, I think it'll be a generation still, only because some of this will be looked at retrospectively. And I think some of the people that were younger leaders within this process who have those lessons learned are going to eventually be those guys in Congress, if Congress, you know, doesn't have a war against people that served trying to get in there. But I think that would be what I would hope out of all of this, is that at least there's some nuggets that make it into our military doctrine or into our state doctrine that basically say, or that help make better decisions in the process. But I mean, I don't think, because the same damn leaders are. Well,
we're turning around and basically, you know, we jump right back into it with Ukraine, and then and we'll get to some of this stuff. But I mean, we're on the verge of who knows what with Israel. You know, I mean, that could very easily turn into a world war if Iran decides to jump in with Russia. And, you know, I think Russia's a little busy right now, so I'm not necessarily probably too worried about them being heavily involved in this. But it's it's a crazy time. But we kind of jumped across to the end there, but I do want to go back to did you come home and then deploy a couple more times, or what was your tempo there?
So immediately come back, and we have basically a year off before it's time to go do another hop, right? And so we start training up for that. In that period of time, though, really in all of the time before, with the deployment cycles that were basically 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off. The 173rd we had done some qualifying jumps, but we'd kind of fallen off of like being an actual airborne unit from a conventional side. Simultaneously, Russia starts saber rattling a little bit, right? And so where I was at in Italy, we were also the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, kind of nation stability force for all of Europe and North Africa. And so we had to be prepared to do multiple mission sets. And at the time, you don't know if you're going to go back to Afghanistan or if you're going to get sent to another whatever. So we were given the mandate to kind of get ready to do, potentially to train up for force on force for a large conventional open war idea.
And with your year off, you're in Italy just training,
yeah,
pretty much? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's just it. It's not really a year off.
Yeah,
so
right.
15 days is basically the amount of vacation you have when you come off of that deployment. So like I went and visited family, and then me and a bunch of guys skied all the major resorts in the Alps, right? Like, so like that was our little time off, and then it was back. At that time, like things start getting reorganized. You know, leadership gets moved around, you know, you promote. So like I promoted and moved into, you know, some staff jobs or whatever, because that's what you do as an officer, is you kind of go in and out of a direct leadership and then a staff position, and just kind of learning throughout the process. So I got assigned to be the air officer for our battalion, and our battalion got assigned to be the next to basically validate and rebuild our airborne program. So I had to get as many jumps as I possibly could to go to Jump Master School, to get qualified to go to Jump Master School. So I then go to Jump Master School. Which it honestly is one of my favorite schools in the Army, just from the academic side of it. I thought it was really great to learn something that had a direct one, that had to be from a safety standpoint. And you know, this is a lineman, like you're on. And right. I loved how hyper focused you had to be good at it. And so did Jump Master School. My Jump Master instructor was Gunnery Sergeant Brad Colbert, who is Iceman from Generation Kill. If you've ever seen that movie or read that book from Rolling Stone or whatever, he was played by Alexander Skarsgård. But so Brad Colbert was my Jump Master instructor right before he retired. So that's kind of funny. But so I became a Jump Master and start leading our basically building up our airborne program. And in that, it was, you know, getting jumps for our entire battalion and the brigade, and then also doing multinational jumps. So, you know, we did like staff rides into Holland, and we jumped into Market Garden to, you know, basically follow what the U.S. and the Brits did in World War II. Staff ride is just basically a field trip that you go on and actually walk the battlefields. So I got to do that, trained a bunch with the Italians, and then got orders to then do basically saber rattling in Ukraine. So so I went ahead on the advanced party, set up the drop zone, and then we jumped in to Ukraine with Ukrainians, with Moldovans, with Polish, with the Brits from Second Para, and basically just did a giant exercise there of just kind of like, hey, this is our capability. We see you. Because at the same time, Putin was threatening to go into the Crimea. So this is way before anything that we see right now, right? Like but so, you know, everybody can kind of see, like, the United States wasn't blind to what was happening. We were as measured as we could be in terms of just like showing that, hey, we will stand in solidarity with a non, you know, Russian affiliated country.
But to some people's point today, with like people saying that Russia kind of was forced to go into Ukraine because, like, with the UN just continuing to creep forward inch by inch. I mean, let's face it, you were saber rattling, but you were also poking the bear a tiny bit, right? Like the government's like, hey, look what two sides of that. Right? There's two sides of that coin, right? Like, does that keep them out, or does that also like just continue to piss them off more and more, right? Like, now we're in their back. Like, imagine if China performed a big jump 10 miles into Mexico, like a huge operation, right? Like, it definitely warns us that Mexico has powerful friends, but it also really pisses us off. You know, it's an interesting like dynamic there.
Well, the foreign policy side of it, absolutely, in my opinion, was not the right way to go. Like, especially with the NATO thing. And if you listen to all of the interviews and you hear kind of the rhetoric that was being thrown, we absolutely were poking the bear. From a defense side of it, though, and I think from really the gate, you know, being gatekeepers in Europe in terms of trying to make sure that we had an established democracy across all of, you know, our greatest partners, you have to show that you are willing to punch if punched.
Right.
And so I think that was the only part of that is like, hey, we see you, doing this, back the fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
So from that standpoint, and the other side of it is just overall training and capability of partner nations, I think is critical, right?
For sure.
And I mean, that's a lot of what, our Green Berets do. That's what, really a lot of us on the conventional side spend a lot of time having to do the same mission in a lot of ways, just because we were tapped. Like that was the mission in a lot of our areas of operation. So we did a bunch of that stuff from an airborne side of things, and like got the battalion all spun up, and then at the same time I dropped my packet to go to SF. So I get reclassed as an 18 Alpha.
Well, hold on. You also told me a funny story here about dropping into like some farmer's field.
So yeah, our drop zone was a giant wheat field, basically stony. The guy didn't de-rock his field because I think that was too much for him. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because we get on the drop zone land, and there are two guys literally there's paratroopers landing all over the place, right? And there's two guys with old scythes, horse drawn carriage, and literally just cutting grass.
That's man shit.
It right just there. Yeah. So I say tongue in cheek about de-rocking his field because they would have been doing it with, one boulder at a time with a donkey.
But I can't imagine what they think when bunch of military dudes are dropping in all over around them as they're
it was
hand cutting their hay or their wheat.
Well, and like some of the other stuff that was kind of eye opening for me too is like when we did our airfield seizure, we were using an old Ukrainian Air Force or Russian Air Force base, and the Ukrainians use it now, and on it there's a couple bunkers, and then there's a giant flight line full of Su-25s and MiG-29s and all of these Su-27s, like all of these incredible, Russian fighter jets. And I took a picture. I think I've shown you the picture before. But if you look closely, one's missing a wheel, or one's missing a turbine you can see through the jet. One's missing a seat. One might not have a flap on a wing. Like they had parted these. They're meant to look from the sky like it's a fully equipped Air Force base. Right. But when you get up close and personal, you're like, oh, shit. It's literally, and then they've got like two fighter jets that are in like bomb-proof bunkers that you can see that are the only ones that are prepped.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, every building is a concrete, dystopian building with no windows in it. Like they're living pretty rough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So much so that when we landed our, one of our C-130s with men and equipment, the colonel or whatever he was of the Ukrainian Air Force or whatever they call him, refused to let us exit and demanded a bribe. And so we had to get on the phone with the State Department, and we had to just sit there on the tarmac. We weren't allowed to do anything when they had armed guys there, and we just had to wait until the State Department had cleared it up with this guy. Basically, so one of his generals can yell at him and say, like, stop trying to shake up the U.S. guys. Dude, it was so ridiculous. I mean, that was an eye-opening experience. And we got to go into some of the towns and stuff like that. I think me and a bunch of other guys on the Jumpmaster crews we bribed this guy to, he had a van, a little panel van that had a sliding door. And so we bribed him to go into town. And so he gets us all loaded up in there, and we're having a good time and whatever. And we think it's a good idea to be on in Ukrainian roads. Like, it's not the same, they're highly crowned, but they're narrow, and they're just like pitched asphalt that's just been kind of patched on there. And so we're like going and the guy has us going to like 90 in this like tiny little panel truck. And so we think it's a really good idea because we're young and stupid to do what's called actions in the aircraft, where you open the door. And when you're in a real aircraft, when you're doing your Jumpmaster duties, you have to check the rear of the aircraft. So you literally hang out of the side of the airplane and check the rear of the aircraft to make sure there's nothing that the static lines can get caught up on. And or there's no obstructions, or there's no tow jumpers or whatever. And so we were doing this at like 90 on a shitty Ukrainian road with this half drunk guy that we bribed to drive us into town. We're hanging out of the side of a little panel truck. So we probably made some really good decisions. Had that ended badly, that would have been news somewhere. That probably wouldn't have been good.
Yeah.
So anyway, we kind of do all of that stuff. And that was where that was kind of just to validate, one, us as an airborne organization, two, then we went and did a bunch of training after all of that stuff, force on force at some of our joint training centers, basically where they were bringing in, entire other brigades to fight brigades, just something we hadn't been doing for a long time, and doing, a total synergizing all of our assets. So we would jump in, and then we would do long form, combat training against another enemy, sometimes mechanized, whatever. So, we really got to test some of our capabilities. Oh, by the way, we're waiting for orders to go to Afghanistan again. So at the same time, I put in a lot of us, especially the officers that I was with, that were in my peer group. That conventional assignment is about the best assignment you can have without going to Ranger Regiment or without going to Special Forces. And so that was the natural progression for us. All of us were either fighting tooth and nail to be picked up as platoon leaders to go to Ranger Regiment or rebranching to over to SF. So I put my packet in to go to selection, get my selection date. Oh, by the way, I had started a relationship with somebody. To back up a little bit, I had been in a relationship before that. That person was with me through college, through my initial military training, all the way through deployment. About a month into deployment, she leaves me.
Yeah.
like days after my first firefight, and I'm like feeling fucking sorry for myself and all this. And so then I go through the rest of the deployment. I come back and I get some time. Like I said, we had a little bit of time, and I sign up for eharmony.com because that was before all of the swipes. All of you swipers.
Yeah, that was the beginning of Tinder.
Yeah, right. My wife would love you saying that.
Don't look over at me.
So you're the young one here, Henry. So yeah, before the Swipe Nation happened, I signed up for eHarmony because I didn't have time, to be completely honest. I was going to find either an Italian girl, Eastern Bloc stripper, or another American person, which probably would have been somebody else's wife. So I didn't have any options, right? Yeah. And so that was kind of, so I did I set my search criteria for all of the world and just, kind of went through that process. And I ended up talking to my wife, Crystal, right? Who, spoilers, my wife. So we get to talking and things are great. And one of the best things about that I'll tell anybody, especially young people that are doing this stuff, and I don't know if this translates now with as many dating apps and all that crap that's out there, but there was no pretense. It was just talking.
Right.
And if you choose to be honest with somebody, fully honest, and air out all your bullshit and just get to know somebody, it's like pen pals, basically.
Right.
No sexual pretense, right? You're not picking somebody up in a bar. You're not sleeping together first day or any of that kind of stuff. It was literally just getting to know somebody.
Right.
So we built a really strong relationship just in that. And so she was from Florida, and things had progressed, right? So I finally tell her hey, you should come see me. So being naive and stupid, I give her my credit card and tell her to get a plane ticket. This is what you have to do, and that I'll come pick you up. And so she did, thank God. And so come to the time for me to go pick her up. She's flying into Venice. I live in Vicenza. It's about an hour on the autostrada. The autostrada also is walled pretty much from Vicenza to Venice. So it's an hour of no exits. You're just in this walled highway. So I rent a car. It's a little Fiat 500, a Cinquecento. I sit in it like this, right? Just tiny little thing. And off I go. Well, I didn't know this, and I leave 3 hours early.
Yeah.
So just because I didn't want to risk anything. I didn't it's an hour drive there. I wanted to have time to find a parking spot and wait and just in case anything happened. I thought through this. One, I was super excited.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
And I thought through this. So 3 hours, plenty. Get there. All right. I start driving. I'm 20 minutes outside of Vicenza and it gets to bumper to full complete stop. And there is an accident outside of Venice, but the traffic's backed up an hour, bumper to bumper in all 4 lanes or 3 lanes or whatever. It's a big highway. And I have no way to communicate.
Yeah.
Zero. I have a European cell phone, but that was before like SIM cards were as good as they are. Or, like you couldn't like, you know, whatever. These were flip phones and shit still.
Right.
So I have no way to communicate. And so I've got this girl who trusted me flying to Europe. She's never been overseas, never done anything like that by herself. And I'm literally her only point of contact. And so 1 hour goes by, another hour goes by, another hour goes by.
You're now late.
I'm now late, and I'm still an hour away.
Yeah.
And things are like slowly crawling. So I'm 2 hours late, almost 3 hours late. I finally pull up, and I just say, fuck it, and I pull up to the front door of the airport. And I get out, she walks out, and like I don't know what possessed her to walk out at that time. And I just happened, like we both said, and the first words I said was, I'm sorry. And I've only said I'm sorry ever since. So I started off on the right foot. Guys, say you're sorry. So
yeah,
that was it. And so, you know, we dated, and she spent time, she came back and forth and all of that stuff. And so fast forward, that relationship is going strong during this time. I'm still traveling. I'm still doing training and all this to get ready for another deployment, potentially depending on what happens with selection. So I get my selection date, and I get a call from Crystal telling me she's pregnant.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh shit. Yay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Actually, it's funny. I got an email about it, and I was in Grafenwehr, Germany with my sergeant major and my battalion commander, and we're sleeping on the floor in this, like on a concrete floor in like a small like generator room. Mm-hmm. Like we just have found a spot to crash, right? And so I spent my like, hey, I found out that, you know, we're pregnant or whatever with those two guys. It's pretty funny. Anyway, so she tells me that she's pregnant, and she also has concerns with the fact that like I'm about to go to selection and start a whole pipeline, because like I talked to her about all this stuff. Like this was the plan, and this was the plan for like 6 years, 5 years, right? Like since I'd been in college, since a sophomore in college, right? My degree was focused on this, and so it was a really difficult thing for me to have this conversation with her, and like I'm doing this, and she was like, "Yeah, but you need to be present for our kid," and like she had so. And this is not a bash on her, but that was her expectation. Like that's what she needed, really. Right. And she had the balls to say that she needed that.
Yeah.
You know, and so like it was a lot of soul searching, but she also didn't grow up in the military. So like what I saw as successful relationships, the only ones that I saw actually last, and this isn't, you know, exclusive, but my personal experience was the guys whose wives that they grew up together. So like when he enlisted, they were together.
Right.
And like they enculturated together. They understood together. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so like it was the family's career. It wasn't the guy's career or the gal's career, whatever.
Right. So
those were the ones that I saw were really successful. Almost every other one of them, if they met after the fact, was a disaster.
Right.
And Crystal was a good example of that, where she came from a Latin family. She's Cuban, and she just had no idea that you know what this whole thing really was going to be, or she did. She had a general sense, and she's like, I don't want to be raising a kid by myself. She already had another child from another marriage. Like I was already becoming a stepdad by proxy, right? Like all of this kind of stuff was happening, and she just saw it all, and it was kind of one of those like, I don't know if this is the right career move for you.
Yeah.
So like I said, I had already reclassed. I was going to selection, and it was one of those things like I knew that was my path. I didn't have any doubts that wasn't going to be the case, and all my buddies were all doing it too. Right? You know what I mean? So I was like, all of my peer group, and I had to look at them all in the face and be like, hey guys, I have to be a dad, and I have to be a good husband.
Right.
And so I chose. That was the first step in like choosing family over the military.
Right.
Which was really hard for me.
Yeah.
And still is. Like I grieve it in a way, just because, you know, then you go with the like, well, fuck, what if? But then the other part of it is, what if I didn't choose my kids?
Right.
What would I have done to them, et cetera? And like we've seen guys that raise kids in the military. It's fine. But I made that choice. Right. And that was a hard choice to make.
Yeah. I can respect that to the highest degree. I mean, that's, you're really choosing family over self, you know, and you know, quite honestly, ultimately, even if you'd have been in another 10 years and done all that, like, at the end of the day, it is just a job.
Yeah.
Like, it is, you know.
Yeah, it becomes ego at some point.
It does, right? Like, you want to be the cool guy. You want,
Sure.
you know, and those guys are unbelievable. And it's one of the things that I talk about often. Like, everybody talks about the veteran, the damaged veteran, or the guy that spent all that time and what he dedicated. And none of that's untrue. That's all true. But rarely do people talk about, like, how much the families gave. And that's the part that blows me away. Like, these guys that have 2 or 3 kids, missing them with their first words, missing them walking, missing their football games or their basketball games, and everything along the way, anniversaries and Christmases, and then the stress and the damage that's done on the relationship or the person of the wife who's sitting there worrying or wondering, you know, the amount of work and effort that those wives have to do to raise families and be mom and dad.
Yeah.
It's you know, the veterans really chose their path, and for the most part, a lot of it they loved and enjoyed. So I don't want to say this and sound bad, but like, you hear a lot of friends told me, like, it wasn't that hard for me.
No.
Like, I was doing
What I wanted
fun
to do.
shit, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there was miserable times, right? And there was
That's where
definitely
the fun is, though.
rough times if you saw your buddy got, you know, injured or killed, like, for sure. But you were surrounded by your peers and the people, frankly, that you loved. So a lot of people say it was much harder for the family than it was for the actual guy doing the thing.
100%. Yeah, when people say, hey, thanks for your service, I'm like, no, you know, thank her.
Right.
Because, you know, this was just the start of it, you know. So, like, I did. So I withdrew my packet and stayed in the conventional force. Went to the captain's career course, you know, as the next step or whatever, and then got an assignment. And for officers, you have to do a light assignment and then some sort of mechanized or wheeled assignment. Because just to give you the experience of commanding all sorts of types of units on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. And I knew I wanted to go to Strikers because the Striker platform was one of the newer platforms that was in the military. Like, the doctrine of it is still being written. And so I got assigned to 3rd Cav as a Striker unit. It was reclassed as an infantry unit, still commanded by some armor guys. But they were bringing a bunch of us with combat experience, light, you know, warfighters that needed to help build doctrine, you know, and also gain experience running mechanized organizations. So yeah, we went to Fort Hood, and so we had our baby, right? While we were at the captain's career course, our son Dean was born. We go to Fort Hood, and I get assigned to 3rd Cav and start there. So I'm on staff there, and then I was fortunate enough to get selected to be our headquarters company commander. Which is actually usually a second assignment, because it's a much larger organization, far more complicated. It's got your scouts, you know, with all your snipers. It's got your mortars. It's got, you know, in Strikers, it's got an MGS, which is like a striker with a tank gun on top of it, right? So, like, and then you're in charge of all of the other different support units as well. So you've got tons of families that you're responsible for. So in that experience, that's where I really learned, I think, leadership at scale, and learning to build systems and learning to figure out how to not drop all of the balls. And, you know, and we actually had that anecdote yesterday where it's where I learned that, like, every ball is a glass ball. And if you try to not drop all of them, you're going to fail. You're going to drop all of them, or you're going to fail somebody. You've got to start learning a person's got to start learning to triage, you know, what glass ball in what day, in what minute sometimes you're going to drop.
Right.
So at that point, I'm responsible for all the training, all the families, everything. Crystal gets forced into that, like, as an FRG leader, which is a family readiness group. Like, and so she's like, despite the fact that we didn't go, you know, in the special operations side, she's still well into the whole military life, right? And it is definitely not the life that I think she imagined or was prepared for. And to her credit, she was really good about communication from that standpoint. But I still was like, well, I'm committed. Like I've been doing this. I don't quit anything I start. I'm going to do my 20 years. Like we're already, I think at that point we were like, it's nearly halfway there already.
Yeah.
And so we do that command. I get another command after that one. And General Milley gets put in charge of Third Corps at Fort Hood, who's now, General Milley, the big guy in charge. So, and we were getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. So we go do a bunch of our training and all that stuff, and we're about to go to Afghanistan. And I get called in, and I was told, because we're starting to kind of get which part of the battle space we were going to get. And I get told, you're not going to Afghanistan. And I lost my shit. I was like, that's absolutely unacceptable. I said some egotistical thing like, why would you keep a Ferrari in the garage? Like just something so stupid, just kind of like, and honestly, I had as much or more experience than almost anybody that had gone there before, especially in the areas we were going to. So I was a little bit pissed about it. But then, to placate my ego, they were also like, well, General Milley told, I'd selected you to take a company to go do another mission, a special assignment. So I was like, oh, okay. And then,
well, better be cool.
Yeah, well, it was different. That's for sure. Yeah. So I get a special assignment to the Caribbean. And so I took a company to the Caribbean, to Guantanamo Bay. And so I did a special assignment there. Right before that, we were pregnant with Crystal and I's second child, our third child as a family, our daughter Amelia, and Crystal's 7 months pregnant, and says, I've got a burning in my stomach, and it's not normal. And I'm like, oh no, okay, well let's go to the doctor. So the doctors are like, oh, it's Braxton Hicks or something. You're fine. Baby's not due for nearly 2 months. Like, it is what it is, and she gets ready to get sent home. And now we're sitting there and she goes, no, my stomach really hurts. Like something's wrong. And this doctor, Dr. Villalobos, is walking the hall and he goes, stop. And he stopped everybody. And he ran in and kind of said like, what, tell me exactly. And she's like, well, I feel my stomach is like on fire. And they immediately check her and her uterus is ruptured.
Oh shit.
And it's go time. So, at this point, we're like, fuck, because our baby's way more premature than premature. And so they start injecting steroids immediately, trying to just do whatever they could to like speed up to get whatever they could into the baby, into Amelia, and meanwhile, they're prepping Crystal for a C-section delivery. And so like, this all happens in minutes. Meanwhile, my kids are at school, like we don't have anything ready. I got nothing. So like I talked to the doctor and, they're going to prep Crystal for a little while. So I've got time and I'm sitting here being a stupid man thinking I've got to solve every fucking problem.
Right.
So I'm calling people to try to help pick up my kids and trying to coordinate everything. And so I get in the car and I run and I grab like a car seat from somewhere, cause I didn't have one. And I pick up pick up Dean, and then get Darian, and then I have somebody, then we call somebody else to have them watch the kids. And then I go grab our like go bag, and then I run back to the hospital just in time for her to be like prepped and ready to go on the table. And so then they go in there, they call me in, they do the C-section. I'm right there with her, pull the baby out. Baby's not crying. Baby's not even a baby, like it's little. I cut the umbilical cord, and we were both, Crystal was a champ. Like, she stayed calm the whole time. She had totally reserved, and the fact that her uterus ruptured, she was in trouble too.
Right.
And she had basically reserved that she wasn't going to make it. And she told the doctor, she told me, she's just like, hey, let's do whatever you can for the baby. And so they rush the baby out, and go to the emergency NICU and get Crystal kind of patched up and stuff. And so we just kind of wait. When doctor comes in and says, the baby's alive, baby's on a respirator, and all the machines there are in an incubation tube and all of this kind of stuff. And Amelia was the size of my hand. And so we just kind of work all that out. And so Amelia ends up being in the NICU for a month and is progressing pretty well. A couple times, not good. We had a couple really bad scenarios there. In the meantime, Crystal we get her in like an apartment unit at the hospital because she's also recovering, but also needs to be close to Amelia. And she has to listen to all the kids that don't make it.
Right.
So that stuff gets, that beat her up a little bit. Meanwhile, like Amelia is doing okay. Like they're taking her off ventilation and feeding tubes and things like that. And she's starting to kind of recover. And this is a solid month, by the way. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I have a whole group of guys that I'm prepping to do something else with. And thank God I had a really good support system from the command side and let me kind of just fucking bear down and deal with what was happening there. Mm-hmm. So that was great. We get basically through that month, and they're like pushing us out. Basically, this is an Army hospital. They're great, don't get me wrong, but they needed space and all that. And Amelia's about recovered, where they think like she can go home. We make it 2 days at home, and Amelia stops breathing.
Oh shit!
So we're back in the NICU again for another month. And then finally, thank God, because they were like, shit, we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
She was in a different NICU though. She was actually in like the regular one versus like the emergency ICU and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So we get kind of all that squared away, get through that, get her home. She's doing better now. At this point, she's had her full 9 months, 2 of which were spent outside of the body.
Yeah.
And she's doing okay. And then I've got about a few weeks before I have to leave.
Yeah.
So marking off on Crystal's little, like, this is fucking bullshit checklist. Like that was a hard pill to swallow. So I then grab everything or get everybody ready. And, again, with like trust with commands and kind of being entrusting that you can kind of do whatever you want. I was literally given carte blanche to do whatever kind of training I needed to. Mm-hmm. So like the general mission set was a security mission, that I needed to get some guys experience that didn't have any experience with. So like we went to a supermax prison in New Mexico, did a bunch of training there. All of us got detainee certified and stuff, sprayed with OC, all this police training and all that kind of bullshit. Some of that was not our mission set, but it was part of kind of just the whole mission that I was supposed to do. And so then we deploy to Cuba. Get to Cuba, and it was an entirely different experience, right? So like I'm doing one mission, that's a strategic level mission, and then I have a bunch of guys that are between 18 and 45, that have to do partially a strategic mission and then partially just have to mark time and kind of do a subset mission, right?
Right.
So guys with a lot of time on their hands. So like we did some fun stuff,
Were you guys pretty much pulling security for the prison there?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yep. There's people that do that too. Mm-hmm. That was a subset mission that we had, and then we had another job to do there too. And so so a lot of us all got like scuba certified. That was pretty cool. Like we all did our open water and advanced open water, and the diving there, of course, is amazing. 100-foot visibility. We did tons and tons. It's what you did on your time off as you dive. So I got tons and tons of dives and lots of experience and had a great time becoming, getting all that experience of scuba diving. So that was a plus out of it. I also met, was doing a joint assignment, so I got to meet a lot of really cool people and do some really cool stuff with that. It was also one of those things, like I watched a lot of C-SPAN because Obama was doing a lot of stuff during that time from a policy standpoint, trying to close down Gitmo, trying to do all sorts of stuff. Although our mission was tied to that, it wasn't necessarily related to that, but it was something that was exposed me to the strategic level in all of that, in terms of policy and stuff. So that was interesting. Meanwhile, Crystal's at home dealing with a brand new baby. At this point, we find out that Dean's starting to regress. So about a year, almost a year and a half, everything was pretty normal. He was like a normal child. But then after that, he started to regress. He was, up to a certain point, he was talking, doing all sorts of, everything normal. And then he stopped talking completely, and started like ticking a lot. And we were like, oh no, something's wrong. And so come to find out he was autistic.
Mm-hmm.
So we got him into like therapies and things like that. So now, and this is all happening like while I'm deployed through all of this stuff. So
you're laying on the beach diving in the Caribbean.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there's just a lot going on. And meanwhile, I have to stay focused on the mission,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I could see it was destroying Crystal, because she'd come from a big family that had aunts and uncles at their house every day, and they were taking care of her, and friends and family, and and now she's by herself on a military base without any support whatsoever, and is just barely making it by. This was not the life that she had imagined for herself, and I totally understood that. So 9 months into that deployment, I get a call basically from Crystal, and she's just like, "This is it. I'm done."
Right.
I'm like, and like I could kind of see it a little bit over some time, and finally she was like, she just basically said like, it's either the military or me, and I was like, okay. For me, that was easy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I knew what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that I wanted family. I knew family was so important. It all started from when I was a kid. I didn't ever want to be the guy that wasn't around for his kids. Right. So I was now left with, this was the only thing I'd worked for in the last 15 or 10, 12 years at that point, or 10 years or whatever it was. And I was like, okay, I got to change the game plan.
Yeah. Well, let's pick that up. So I want to do part 2, because I don't want to rush, because I want to dive into this transition through getting out,
Mm-hmm.
and then diving into civilian life.
Yeah.
And take the time, because there's a bunch there, and it's a pretty cool career all the way up until where we are today.
Sure.
So I think we'll break this into a 2-part deal, which I kind of actually expected, because I knew
that long-winded.
No, I knew it's cool, because there's a lot of life experience. There's a lot of stuff, and that's what's cool about podcasts. So
yeah.
Let's 2-part this one. Let's go down. We got meetings to get to, and then most importantly, we got to shoot some guns today, sight some rifles in, and then head to a cool event in Idaho. So
cool.
Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah.
And we'll pick this up. I guess it'll be next week. I've never gotten to say that. Join us next week for part 2 with Andrew Oliver. All right. Thanks, bud.
All right. Thanks.